told him, "Change or I'm out," he just smiled and packed his bags immediately. Little things are important, especially in a relationship. And I think I realized that too late, because I paid attention to the wrong little things and ignored the right little things. And that was what broke my relationship. I still can't believe it, that something so little and petty could break my relationship. My relationship with Scott was 4 years long when I figured out that he was going to propose to me. It was probably the happiest day of my life. I found out in the most common way that would make anyone laugh. I was going through his clothes and I saw an engagement ring in his jacket. I was so excited that I screamed for joy. I had been waiting long enough, but I had never said anything about it. And to know that he had it in mind and had even bought a ring to propose was just too much joy for me to contain. That day, when he came back, I couldn't exactly tell him that I found the ring in his pockets because that would take the fun out of the actual proposal. So I didn't say anything about it. Instead, I expressed my joy with my actions. I cooked his favorite meal, gave him a leg massage, and all the things I know he loves me doing for him. But hearing all these, you're probably thinking that our relationship was perfect, but it was far from it. Or to state that correctly, my behavior made our relationship imperfect. Scott worked a lot, and that meant he was almost always away from home. He was the type of person a coworker could call to help with a shift at work, and he would gladly take it. And that was what drew me to him at first, that and the fact that he was willing to go out of his way to help people, as well as his funny but functional type of dressing. But you know what they say, the reason you fall in love with someone is sometimes the reason you fall out of love with that person. When we started dating, I didn't see any of these things as a problem. He would work a lot, but he would still make time to come see me. He would still make time out for dates and hangouts. And I was satisfied with that, but I think things went wrong when he asked me to move in with him. That was a few months into the second year of our relationship. Before my discovery of this engagement ring, that was the best thing that had happened in our relationship, and I was so happy when he asked me that. It meant that he took us seriously. To me, it was a very high honor that showed that I was important in his life. And I didn't mince my words. I accepted with a joyful heart. He took 2 days off work to help with the move, and after I settled in, it was like I moved them with a ghost. The first week was manageable. He would leave for work early in the morning and return at night. But I was lucky enough to see him before I went to sleep. I was lucky enough to cuddle him. But barely a month after I moved in, things got worse. You would work till very late at night, and when he would return, I would have slept off. This went on for months. I could go an entire week without seeing my boyfriend, but somehow we were living in the same house. I didn't realize how better I had become because of this. I wanted him to be at my side more and more, but it seemed like he was prioritizing work over me. One night, I decided to stay awake, no matter how late he would return, and my goodness, he returned by past 12 a.m. I was tired because I was determined. When he came back, I had a conversation with him about him being so absent. He tried to explain and asked for just 2 more months, that he was working towards something, and that once he achieved it, he would be more present. But that felt like forever to me, and I could not understand the situation he was in. I became a nagging girlfriend. Whatever little chance I got with him, instead of us spending some loving time together and being in each other's arms, I'd give him a hard time by saying that he should have just slept over at work. I put him through a lot, and our relationship went through a dark period that began looking like it was a mistake for me to come live with him. But before I knew it, the 2 months he requested were up, and he was actually now more available. He had gotten promoted, and I was really happy for him. To celebrate, he took me to a fancy restaurant, and we spent hours just talking and laughing. It was like everything was fine again between us, and I felt happy with my relationship again. But the problem was never that Scott wasn't always around. It was that I was too ungrateful to see things from his point of view, and to see the amount of work he was putting into our relationship by making sure he came home, no matter how late. And my ungrateful nature showed its head again after a few weeks. We had been on a series of dates and hung out more times that week than we had in our entire relationship, and Scott wasn't stopping. He planned a picnic for us, and I was very excited. Other than family picnics, I had never been on a picnic with a boyfriend or love interest, and I was anticipating the picnic so much. But on the afternoon of the picnic, he told me that a friend of his had an emergency that she had to handle, so he had to take over for her at work. I could not believe it. I told him that we had things planned already, and he couldn't just push me aside for another woman. He tried to explain to me that it wasn't like that, but I did not care. In my eyes, he would rather help some girl at work than hang out with his own girlfriend. I told him that I now see how little he thought of our relationship and of me. He looked emotionally shattered by my words, and I was hoping that was going to make him stay back and go on the picnic with me like we originally planned. But that was not the case. No matter how much of a bad mood he was in, he didn't stay back. He left for work, leaving me completely shocked. I spent the entire day trying to wrap my head around what had happened. The way I saw things that day was that Scott had picked another woman over me, so he most definitely was cheating on me with her. I began developing bizarre theories in my head. The most predominant one was the thoughts that he might have been coming back home late because he was having an affair with her. The more I thought about it, the more riled up I became. That day I didn't even need to struggle to stay awake. My eyes stayed open like a torch whose battery never died. I was that way until Scott came back at night, and I was waiting to rain hell down on him that day. He came back home with flowers and chocolate in hand, but I didn't care. I felt betrayed, and I wasn't the type to let those who betrayed me go free. I accused him of cheating on me, and Scott was completely flabbergasted. He told me that what I was accusing him of was completely absurd, claiming that he didn't even have the time to sit down and eat his meal properly, so how was going to develop the time to cheat on me? It sounded so funny to him that he even laughed as he spoke. He tried to diffuse the situation, but his laughter and playful approach just made me angrier. To show how serious I was, I refused to talk to him after that, no matter what he did. This went on for a few days, until my mother told me that she wanted to see the man I was dating. That put me in a difficult situation because I couldn't just approach him and tell him that I wanted him to meet my mother when we weren't talking. I didn't want to take him either, but my mother didn't give me a choice. I had to invite him, so I walked to him while he was playing a game on his phone in the living room. He was honestly shocked I had walked up to him, but once he saw me, he put down his phone and gave me all his attention. I told him that my mother wanted to see him, and his reply to me was that he would come if I wanted him to come. The reply just got me furious. I asked him what he meant by that, and he told me that I had refused to talk to him for days, so he wouldn't be surprised if I did not want him to see my mother despite me asking. I was so mad back then, but looking at it now, it was a valid question, because now I know how petty I can be. Before I moved in with him, I once didn't talk to him for an entire week, because he introduced me by my name to his friends, instead of introducing me as his girlfriend. When he saw that I had gotten even angrier, he quickly apologized and told me that he would be more than happy to meet my mother. I was happy, and we were finally talking again, but all that meeting was going to do was just spark in your phase of problems in our lives. The problems began on the evening of the meeting, when we were getting dressed and preparing to leave the house. He wore something so simple that it just made me lose my mind. I asked him if he was going to a kiddies' playground, and he asked me what I meant by that. I looked for the most subtle way to communicate to him that I didn't like the way he was dressed, but all of that came out of my mouth was that he was dressed like a buffoon. He couldn't believe me. I had said it, and I wasn't the kind of person who would take back my words, so I emphasized on what I had said. I told him that I had been keeping quiet for quite some time now about your stressing, but I wouldn't let him embarrass me in front of my perfectionist mother. That statement sparked a whole lot of arguments that night. He asked me how long I had seen him as an embarrassment, and if I had any common sense, I would have found a way to ignore that question, but I didn't even an ounce of common sense, so I blatantly told him that I had always been embarrassed by him, and I didn't stop there. I told him that every single time we went out together, I was worried that people would look at me like an idiot because I was with him. He won't ask me if I thought I was too good for him, and my answer to him was that it seemed like it. Scott was furious, and I thought that fight meant we were definitely not going to see my mother that evening anymore. But Scott told me that we should just go meet my mother, since she would most probably be waiting. I told him I didn't want to go anymore, and he tried to talk me into going, but I was strong-headed. After several minutes of convincing, I finally agreed to go, but I told him that we had to go to the venue separately because I couldn't be in the same car as him. I left the house first and met my mother in the restaurant she was already waiting in. There was several scary and annoying thoughts jumping through my mind while I talked to my mother. I thought of the possibility that Scott would stand me up. Then I thought of the possibility that he would come still wearing the clothes Side scolded him about. That was probably because I was expecting him to change the outfit. After about 10 minutes talking with my mother and her telling me that she hoped Scott was handsome and established, he finally walking in. And to my own detriment, he was wearing the same clothes I was angry about. It wasn't that they were bad, but they were a bit too simply taste. I felt like getting up and leaving the restaurant, but I held that anger in. Scott joined us at the table and flattered my mother with compliments, telling her how much he had anticipated meeting her. My mother was utterly blown away. The next thing I heard her say was her telling him that he looked wonderful. You should have seen the stare he gave me. It was a kind of "I told you so" stare. They spent the entire night talking and laughing while I was just feel like the third wheel, being a grouch. What every couple wishes for was happening right before my eyes. My partner was getting along with my mother, and instead of being happy, I was bitter. I wanted to rip out Scott's tongue so badly, but I held myself back. And when we got home, I wanted to argue and fight with him, but I decided to give him the silent treatment. Our relationship was like this through the time we have been dating. There have been some good times when everything just felt perfect, but it has mostly been arguments and silent treatments and fights, which was why when I found the ring in his pocket, I was honestly shocked. It made me think that we were just like every other couple. I always used to think that we fought a lot, a bit too much even, but I suppose that's how every couple is. They fight and they reconcile, and for a moment I was worried that we were unlike any other couple, and that there was no future for us. But this ring meant that there was a future. I became a different person after I saw that ring. I became nicer and calmer, and I tried to not flare up as much as I usually did. I tried to be a good girlfriend and be on my best behavior. But I waited for days, and those days turned into weeks, and soon it was a month, and still he didn't pop the question. The longer I waited, the more frustrated I became. And soon I was even more bitter than I had ever been. We were at home one day, just chilling when he tried making romantic advances at me, and I was actively rejecting his advances. I charmingly asked him if there was anything he wanted to ask me, but he said there was nothing, and just before I lost my cool, his phone rang. He immediately picked it up and answered the call. His friend had an emergency and needed Scott to help him look after his 7-year-old son. Without even blinking, Scott agreed to help. I couldn't believe. I asked him what kind of man springs up from a sensual moment with his girlfriend to answer a friend's call, and his answer to me was jarring. He told me that we weren't doing anything, and that we were not going to do anything, so what was the need of him to keep trying? I was so mad. I felt like exploding. I began ranting at him and nagging nonstop, and he purposely ignored me. He walked to the wardrobe and began getting dressed. And to make matters worse, I added his dress style to the things I was nagging about. I asked him when he would start taking me seriously, and he told me that he had always taken me seriously, but I was never satisfied with anything he did for me. I was infuriated by that statement and told him that if he took me seriously, he wouldn't pick other people over me, and he will dress how I required him to dress. I emphasized on the fact that the way I wanted him to dress was better than whatever nonsense he had in his wardrobe. He sighed in exhaustion and told me that he needed to be on this way because his friend was waiting for him. He was clearly not in the mood to have that conversation with me, but I was all for it. I told him that if his friend wasn't able to take care of his child, then he shouldn't have gotten one. That was when I saw Scott lose it. He looked at me with devilish eyes that could bore a hole through a person. I was a butt scared, but I couldn't show it. To double down on my statement, I told him that I couldn't handle his behavior anymore, and his response was that he should be the one saying that, not me. I was baffled and hurt by that reply. In my anger, I then asked him why he bought an engagement ring if that was how he felt about me. He laughed and asked if that was why I was being nice some time ago. He said the engagement ring was for his friend that was getting married. He was the best man, so he was with the ring. I was so furious when I heard this. He told me that he was tired of fighting and reminded me that a child was waiting for him. In my attempt to exert my power, I told him, "You better change or I'm out of this relationship. I can't be with someone who doesn't value me above all else." He told me that what I wanted was a slave and not a boyfriend, and that I was too selfish. Then he turns to walk away. I told him that if he left the house, it was over between us. He just smirked at me, took a few clothes out of the wardrobe and packed into a bag, then left the house. I was left in shock. I couldn't believe that Scott would do such a thing to me. He chose to help other people. It has now been days, and he still has not come home. I would call any of his friends to ask if he is over at their place, but I don't have any of their numbers, which is very odd. I've dated Scott for a long time, yet don't have the number of even one of his friends. Neither do I know where any of them live. I always turned him down when he asked me to follow him to go visit his friends. I honestly didn't think Scott would walk away when I issued that ultimatum. But he did, and now I'm scared I've lost my man forever. Our relationship may have ended because of my stupidity. It isn't like Scott to disappear like this. Please, I need help. Somebody tell me what to do. I need to find him, and I need to get him back. I can't imagine life without him. Please, someone help me. Update. They say you don't know what you have until you lose it. Well, that has been my case these past few months. I didn't realize how much Scott meant to me and the value he had in my life, but now I do. The only problem is that it is too late. I've tried everything I can because I can't seem to get my boyfriend back. I've lost him for good. I know some of you might be saying that I have a defeated mentality, but that's not true. You have no idea the things I have done to get my boyfriend back, but nothing seems to work. The main problem at first was finding him. For days I wasn't able to read Scott. I tried calling, texting, and emailing him. At some point, I even tried tracking him. I went to his workplace to ask if anyone had seen him, but none of them knew me, so nobody wanted to diverge any information about their coworker to me. And I could understand it. After all, safety is necessary. I know you're probably wondering how none of my boyfriend's cool workers knew who I was. Well added to the list of things that I did wrong during my relationship. I never hang out with his coworkers, followed him to some sort of work dinner. I just kept myself. That means I never went to see him at work either. I know what you're thinking right now, that I'm a terrible person. A lot of you expressed that in the comments during my last post. But I assure you I'm not a terrible person. I'm just misunderstood, that's all. If I was not much of a terrible person, would I have put in so much work trying to find Scott? And believe me, I put in a lot of work. I contemplated going to the police at one point, but I was worried about being dragged into a police investigation. Instead, I decided to conduct an investigation of my own. I knew how much Scott likes to work, so I would go to his workplace after I closed from work in the afternoon and stalk his workplace till late at night just so I could see him. And after almost a week of falling asleep while stalking his workplace, I finally saw him leaving work late one night, and I hurried to approach him. But then I saw a girl calling at him with a big smile. She had a car and she was waiting by it. My brain began to run marathons. He couldn't have possibly found a new girl already. We dated 4 years, and he couldn't replace me like I am nothing. I was getting frustrated when all my efforts kept leading to dead ends, but now that I finally found him, I was even more frustrated. I think I preferred looking for him without finding him, and to think about the toll finding him had taken on my work life. I had to work while I was looking for him, and it was difficult to juggle the both of them at the same time, especially because I had to stay up till late waiting outside his workplace. Then I'd have to go to work in the morning. And this is the result I get? I was so angry that I approached him and the girl angrily. I was seconds away from harassing her when I heard her say that their mother is going to be furious that he missed her birthday. That was his sister. I had seen pictures, but I had never met her in person, and I felt like a terrible person all over again. Perhaps Scott was right. I wanted a slave, not a boyfriend. I couldn't bring myself to approach them anymore, so I just left. I have been sad since that day, and life isn't any easier. I can't afford to pay for the house alone, and the only choice I have is to move into a smaller place, like where I was living before we moved in together. But I don't want to. I feel like I'm clinging to something I pushed away, but I can't help it. But now I realize that I need to work on myself, which is what I intend to do. This is my last update. Thank you all for putting up with me until now. Bye.
My wife began acting strange once we marked our 5-year anniversary, and I knew something was up. She began making shady movements and staying up late to text on the phone with her lights dimmed low. I know you all must be thinking there's nothing wrong with staying up a little late and texting on the phone. It might probably be the girls' group chat. Maybe they're planning a hangout or something. I thought that was maybe it. Lol. I thought there wasn't a lot to it. Label me stupid, right? Well, I've been called stupid in different ways when it comes to my wife. I relayed my worries to my friends, and they all thought I was being paranoid over a few nights of staying up late and receiving text messages. But after various nights of watching her while pretending to sleep, I knew it wasn't just my paranoia. At first, she tried to be discreet with it, of course, but I haven't been fooled ever since I left high school. She would sneak into the bathroom and stay there for hours and sneak back in as the day was about to break. My fellow Redditors, you all don't think that was my paranoia playing a role, right? Well, before you judge me, I decided to test if it was a fluke. I became extra nice. Attention to details and all the stuff ladies seem to love. It was all part of a scheme to know if I was imagining things. Far be it from me to ask her and have her lie to my face, so I planned a trip. It was our 5-year anniversary after all, and I'm sure you all will agree with me that this was the perfect way to watch her without raising suspicions. It was a weekend getaway, and we had to do everything together, so if she's acting up or strange, I would see it clearly, and I would know. As you have it, my friends on here, I took my wife on the weekend getaway, and my suspicions were confirmed. My wife was indeed hiding something with how strange she was acting. It began when we were shown into our luxurious hotel room in the Pacific Northwest, and she had dropped her phone to go freshen up. Can you imagine the way she had run to it at the sound of a text message notification? It was like she was trapped in the Sahara Desert and her phone was the only source of water. I kid you not. I watched her grab the phone and dash back into the bathroom, and I couldn't do anything but stare in disbelief. The next incident happened when we went out to grab the romantic candlelight dinner the hotel offered as part of the itinerary for our trip. All through the dinner, the text messages were frequent based on how late the dinner was. It was her usual texting time with whoever she was on the phone with. So I did the brave thing and asked what the messages were all about and got slapped in the face with a lie. Did she actually expect to believe it was the girls' group chat that texted her constantly? And what happened to trying to find time for your husband during your anniversary getaway? I let that slide too because, as I said, I didn't want to raise suspicions, just gather enough evidence to know I wasn't paranoid. Throughout the weekend, my wife was glued to her phone like a magnet. Nothing could come between. At this point, she was rubbing it in my face that I was a fool, so I laid the last trap. I booked an all-night spa for her, the whole massages, oils, and whatnot. My plan, you may ask? Well, she couldn't be getting a body massage and texting. That's when I planned to strike. I had agreed with the masseuse, going so far as paying them a little tip for them to slip me my wife's phone when she came in for the massage. Color me shamed, but I was going mad with the act and I needed to know. If you all were in my shoes, I'm pretty sure you would have all resorted to measures way worse than this. I know you're wondering how I planned to unlock the phone once I got it, but if you know my wife as much as I do, she wasn't really the smartest one in the box. It was either going to be her birthday or something along the lines of an important event date. I waited just outside the door as her massage date began. True to their word, the masseuse brought out the phone and handed it to me a little later just as another text came in. Turns out I didn't need to unlock it. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you already know who it was, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw on the pop-up screen. It was a text, of course. My wife and her lover were predictable maniacs, but the context of the text was what sent me reeling. It turned out I wasn't paranoid at all. My wife of 5 years was having an affair outside our marriage, and she and her lover were getting ready to serve me divorce papers from all indications of the message. What else could? I can't wait for you to leave him mean. 5 years went down the drain just like that. Although ours wasn't the best of marriages, I don't believe in love and all its excesses, but I tried. I did try to make it work, but it seems I was too weird that my wife didn't even have the audacity to look me in the face and tell me she's done. She had to sneak around with an unknown person through late-night texts. That was pathetic, and I'm sure you all would agree with me. I was about to hand the phone back to the masseuse when it pinged again, and this time it was text containing some sort of prenup document from her lawyer. Prenup? I don't recall signing a prenuptial agreement before we got married. I can't let her spring this up on me, so I decided to do the first thing that came to mind once I got back from this. My marriage was a mess ever since my wife and I exchanged vows on the makeshift altar in front of a rented pasture 5 years. Let me give you a little backstory on how we all ended up here. My name is Keyshawn, and I'm 30 years old. My wife's name is Alice, and she's 28 years old. We met at a friend's wedding party, and she had everything I liked in a lady. Long legs, killer hair, the whole razzle-dazzle. Sadly, she didn't have this great qualities in IQ. But I was intrigued at the moment about her. We got introduced by the couple who we were both distant friends of, and we hit off. Partly because of my curiosity and the fact that she ticked every box in what I wanted my woman to be made of physically. As we started hanging out, I had told her I didn't believe in love and romance and all those cliches. She seemed to agree with me too. Now that I think about it, she always seemed to agree to what I was saying all the time back then. I found out she attended Dartmouth College and was in her final year. At the time, I had already graduated and was working in a startup company in Seattle that paid well. The relationship began on a rocky start because I couldn't see her all the time. Well, rocky for her because she complained numerous times, but I didn't. I felt we had the same interests, so feelings weren't a factor where we were concerned. That wasn't a problem, as I pointed out. My wife and I saw each other when we saw each other, and a year later I proposed. No, I didn't have feelings for her when I proposed. It felt like a partnership. And of course, she agreed. She didn't have feelings for me, I think, but we had mutual respect for each other. My friends all thought I was crazy for marrying a woman. I had no feeling for her, but my wife understood and agreed with me on every take. That's basically what every man would want. At the time, I didn't consider her capable of having an affair. To pull that off, you'd have to be smart, and my wife definitely wasn't up there with the word. I should have considered it, of course, that she'll be able to do something like that, but she hadn't seemed to be complaining throughout our 5 years of marriage. The sex was okay. She didn't want kids. I provided for her. I really couldn't see what else was wrong. I mean, she agreed with everything I said, so I thought she might have wanted it too. Could I have possibly been wrong? My friends had warned me earlier, as I had pointed out, but I hadn't given their warning much thought considering they were all love-whipped. Okay, I'll admit one of the reasons I had been pushed to get married was because they were all doing it, and I hated to be the one left out. Like everywhere I looked back then, one of my guys was getting hitched. I didn't want to be the one left because I had thought love was a fluke, so I got married to my wife. I thought long-term, of course, but long-term for me. My wife was pretty with a face that made a lot of women jealous for days, and I was pretty easy on the eyes too. I was content with that. She seemed to be content too. Heck, I still remember one particular party we attended as a couple in her university days. I was receiving the jealous stare from men, and all the women were giving my wife the death stare because they felt she had bagged a catch. I was the catch. We were a power couple, and she held her head a little higher as we mingled around her friends. She had laughed and clung to my arm all night while smirking and acting proud. That night we talked about our future, and she had once again agreed with everything I had laid out about what I wanted. That was the night we also agreed to get married, and I proposed to her. Although we didn't see each other every time while we were dating, I knew she was perfect for me, and we could make it work. Shortly after, we were wed in a not-so-fancy ceremony, and she didn't complain once. It was just a small gathering of my family and friends with hers. Well, it was mostly her friends. Her parents were terribly against our marriage. 1 year of wedding bliss, 2 years, 3 years, 4 and 5, not one single day of complaint. We made it work together. It seemed like we made it work together in my head, or maybe that was just my paranoia speaking. Lol, I've been paranoid for 5 years that I was doing right by my wife. What exactly would make a woman wake up 5 years later and start consulting her lawyer about prenups if she didn't seem content? What made a woman start laughing at around midnight to her anonymous lover right beside her husband on their matrimonial bed? What I didn't know, my fellow Redditors, was that she wasn't going to be content, and now she was digging up a prenup. A prenup? She wanted to rob me of half of my property with her lover and expect me not to retaliate. That wasn't going to happen on my watch. She must have thought I was easy to fool. Well, she had something coming for her. The first thing I did once we got back from our trip was to hire a private investigator. The PI came highly skilled and recommended by the site I had picked him from. I hoped he could get to the bottom of this. Why my wife wanted a prenup, and who this mystery lover was. His job was just to shadow my wife and dig into her life, and find out what she was hiding. I couldn't just walk up to her lawyer and demand answers because that would result in betrayal of the client's confidentiality. Her lawyer might be in on the scam that was about to come into play here. I didn't tell any of our friends that I had hired a PI because someone could be in on it with her, and almost half of my friends thought our marriage was going well, just like I had thought. The irony. I handed the PI everything I knew on my wife, where she worked, her daily routine, her friends and family contact list. If I knew my wife at all, the information I had handed to him would be correct. Of course, I had thought they would be correct. I had been married to the woman for 5 years. We had lived together. You guys won't believe the information my PI handed over to me 2 days after he started monitoring my wife. It turned out my wife wasn't really my wife. Yes, you read right, my marriage to my wife was null and void. My wife was already married. She was married. Can you believe that twisted piece of information? Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. I couldn't believe it at all. The woman I had said "I do" at the altar in front of my family and friends was married to another man. How, you may be asking? That was the question I had asked myself when the PI had broken the news to me. She was married when we were dating. She was already married in her 2nd year of college, and she had said "I do" to me knowing she already bore another man's name. Unbelievable. How had I never suspected a thing? My fellow Redditors, my wife was truly married. The PI had said there were no records of her ever getting a divorce, no records of a judge annulling her marriage even if it was a fake one. She had lived with me for 5 years. I began wondering about so many things all at once. No wonder she didn't protest getting married after a year of dating. Now that I think of it, she seemed eager to get married almost immediately, playing the demure girlfriend. No wonder her parents hadn't graced our wedding. They had been aware of the sham their daughter was pulling. And like a fool, I had married a scammer, all because I didn't want to be the one left out of all my friends. Lol, I had been a big-time fool, all right. A total idiot because I had just been outsmarted by my wife. Could I even call her that? It had all been a sham. If I had been told somewhere not too long ago that I'll be a victim of a sham, I would have laughed, knowing there was no possible way someone could outsmart me like that. I mean, this is the stuff I see in the movies and shake my head at what a slob the actors were that they had fallen prey to. But this is real life, folks, and I had fallen prey. I had married a married woman, lol. I didn't even know what to think except the fact that I was being played, either by my wife and her husband or my wife and her lover. That was probably who she had been texting all this while, right under my nose. And I had no clue. I hadn't even seen any signs. But they had been so clear to see. I lived with a woman I had no feelings for and knew next to nothing about. I had never seen her parents or siblings or any of her childhood friends even once. I hadn't even bumped into them perchance. My wife had been so perfectly mysterious and I had been so careless and self-centered that I didn't know I had been eating right into her hand. I kept the information to myself, waiting for the perfect time to strike her with it. Unknown to her that I had found out her huge secret, she still kept going on about her day like always. Acting strange, being less touchy-feely, constantly texting on the phone. However, I had caught up with her sham. All those things now had a reason. She wasn't truly married to me. The PI dropped information on her husband the next day, and all I could do was regret not hiring the guy sooner, maybe even before I had gotten married, to prevent myself from this embarrassment. This was a first-hand embarrassment that if any of my friends were to find out, I would become a laughingstock. I just posted this on here because I needed someone to vent to. Apparently, the guy my wife was married to was a low-bum financial analyst who had graduated from the same college as her. The two lovebirds had even attended the same high school and had gotten married when my wife was in 2nd year. However, at the moment of the PI dropping that bomb, I still didn't know why and what this had to do with my wife wanting a prenup. I admit I knew the why and how, but what I was looking for was how she intended to use it against me. Before our marriage, we had never signed a prenuptial agreement, so I was wondering she was going to hold me to one. Fortunately for me, my marriage to my wife was a sham, so it wasn't going to hold to court. It was funny if she actually thought it would come to that I would allow her get away with tricking. So of course I planned out my revenge while waiting for my PI to get back to me. I got in contact with my lawyer and found out that my wife could get arrested for bigamy and face 5 years imprisonment or dole out $100,000. But I needed to make sure that there was no evidence of her ever being divorced or a judge signing their wedding annulment papers. I made sure of that with my PI when he got back to me on my wife's dealings with the prenup. My fellow Redditors, you wouldn't believe the information my PI came to me with this time. Apparently, my wife's lawyer was in on the scam with her. They had planned to lift my signature from one of my work documents and place on the prenup. Their plan was while I was being busted up by the whole serving of divorce papers that I wouldn't see it coming when they slammed the prenup in my face in court. Can you imagine that? They all thought I was eating out of my wife's hand, so the whole divorce thing will unsettle me and then they'll present the prenup in court. Did she really think I was that stupid? I mean, I was actually giving her credit for fooling me into marriage, but this was pure comedy. They had all planned this? A bunch of working brains had planned this. I was disappointed. Very much so. I had graduated top of my class in mathematics and statistical studies. My professors had termed me a genius. Ever since I had left high school, everything I had done was always based on facts and not feeling. In college, I was a well-oiled machine and a monster according to the girls I had dated. You couldn't fool, as I could sniff out lies within a second. Most of the girlfriends I had in college couldn't keep up with me, and you could never say you had outsmarted me. There was an instance when my college girlfriend tried to gaslight me into believing I was the one cheating on her when she was the one being funny with my friends. I cleared her before she even realized what was going on in her life. I didn't like looking like a fool, and what my wife us just done was similar to making me look like one. Anyway, I told my PI to make sure there was no trace of my wife's divorce papers lying around and got to work with my lawyer. Before my wife was going to serve me divorce papers, I was going to surprise her first. So I sued her for bigamy, fraud, and infringement. At least she would be facing 7 years jail time with this or coming up with $500,000 bail. That would teach her not to mess with me. I decided I was going to break the news to her and call her out on her charade before she had the chance to think she had an upper advantage on me. No one does that. Not knowing her whereabouts, I asked the PI to find out where she was at the moment, and I got the information that my wife was last seen entering a hotel with her husband. They had been sneaking around under my nose. I stormed into the hotel and asked for her room number and began causing a havoc when they refused to release it due to clients' privacy. I threatened to write tons of bad reviews about the hotel and publish it on various high-grossing sites. The manager had to come down when the staff informed him of the commotion I was causing and took me to his office to talk. I explained my situation to him, and he took pity on me, which I hated, by the way. But it was a means to an end, so I shut up and let him lead me to the elevator. I followed his lead as he hands me the key card once we got to a hallway on the 3rd floor and informed me he had no in this. My fellow Redditors, I unlocked the door, and as you'd have guessed it, my wife was mid-coitus position with her husband. The shock on her face when she saw me was enough for all the stress I've been through ever since finding out that we weren't truly married. I smiled and threw the papers in her face that my lawyer had drafted up, including the divorce papers she so desperately wanted. I had decided that the best way to settle this was in court and I was going to make them pay. As I walked out, she was following at my back and hollering at me to stop. Well, that was her own business because it was more embarrassment on herself and person. There was a lot of people watching her as she ran after me as I exited the hotel lobby, her face still covered in shock and the hotel sheet wrapped around her chest. I got back home and sent a text to my friends arranging for a party to celebrate our anniversary with them. The plans of revenge I had for this woman was just getting started. The party kicked off and my wife was writhing her hands together in the corner while I mingled among my friends. Lowell, my smile was irreplaceable. I had told my PI to find the location of my wife's husband and had sent thugs to get him. They didn't know what was coming for them, and this was the best way to introduce my wife and her bigamy. And I'm sure you guys are thrilled at the course this was taking. As the party progressed, I got the call that the surprise of the party had arrived. I took my wife to center of our living room and tapped my champagne glass to get the attention of our guest. I gave a speech with a malicious grin on my face as my wife fidgeted by my side and broke the news to my friends. The loud gasps was what made me smile, and my thugs brought out the other man in my marriage. The irony of life was so funny as all eyes was on my wife and the man in my living room. I raised my glass and toasted to their success and started a round of applause to celebrate their marriage anniversary. The next day, my wife moved out without saying a word to me after I had planned to confront her. On that same day, I got a text to notify me of a meeting set between our two parties to sit and negotiate about the divorce. The meeting was already underway, and everything my private investigator had told me was in accordance to what my wife's lawyer had for me. They even still had the audacity to show me the prenup papers with my lifted signature on it. It was unbelievable that their sense was so scanty that they could serve me prenup papers when, first of all, our marriage was not legal. I was perplexed if people like my wife's lawyer was the set of people that presented cases to the court. The court of law couldn't be as stupid. Could it? Firstly, my marriage was illegal. Secondly, my wife lifted or could have even forged my signature. And I'm sure you all are dying to hear what I found hilarious in all this. The fact that they thought they could pull it through. My intelligence was deeply insulted. The meeting continued till late with us coming at a stalemate end, mostly because of me. I didn't plan on letting my wife get away with trying to dupe me. My lawyer fixed the court date 2 days after our meeting to try to come to an agreement. I rose as the court began its proceedings, not caring much for the court process, just what will be the end point. However, my fellow Redditors, my wife had a lot of surprises under her sleeve for this court process. She disproved the fact that she was married with an annulment certificate from 2 months after we started dating. My wife claimed that her first marriage was a scam, and since she hadn't consummated it, she thought it didn't stand ground, most especially after her divorce. Like I had mentioned somewhere in the beginning of my narration, my wife wasn't the smartest person on the block. Since when did non-consummation of a marriage mean the marriage didn't hold ground? She sounded like she was living in the 16th century. I mean, she was seriously embarrassing herself in front of people she didn't know, and the court. Well, that was nothing new for her. Moreover, they had consummated the marriage all right. That's what they had been doing when I had caught them that day. The court took the marriage annulment certificate from her to check its validity, and of course they found it non-existent. There was no record of her being divorced. Lowell, she then resorted to hysterics, claiming that she had watched her husband die, and so she didn't give much thought into questioning if the certificate was valid. This was also the reason she got married again. As you guessed it, her claim was disputed by my lawyer with a footage of her and her husband leaving a hotel together hand in hand. This time, her lawyer didn't waste a second before coming up with a counterclaim that she recently discovered he had survived whatever accident, and she was meeting up with him for the first time. The amount of lies that was thrown around by wife and her lawyer in argument to the charge of bigamy against her was a sight to behold. They had even produced records of her husband's accident and a document that had pronounced him dead. The document had come up as valid, and I was shocked that they had been able to pull a fake document. I was convinced it wasn't even the man's true death certificate and that they had managed to tweak it. I was so shocked at the turn the court was taken. I couldn't believe the court that validates all truth could believe a cheap lie like that. My hatred doubled for my wife then, that she had managed to outsmart the court of law and the people presiding over it. My hatred for my wife began, as you all already know, when she showed she could outsmart me by being married to another man already. I never knew I could hate someone as deep as how I hated her, and now this. It was like I didn't know the woman seated opposite me, like her true personality had shown up overnight, and I was in shock at the easy way she came up with the lies. It was ironic that she was literally the one telling her lawyer what to say before the judge. I kid you not. In fact, at that very moment, my anger and hatred tripled. I had been living with a stranger under the same roof for over 5 years and breathing in the same air. She had been holding the full capacity of her brain back from me, agreeing with me and putting up with me looking down on her so she and her husband could dupe me of my money. This whole thing was partly my fault. At least I admit that to myself, my fellow Redditors. I had seen the shallow side of my wife and thought that she would do for me. And the fact that I didn't want to be left behind amongst my friends, so I married the first person that ticked all my boxes and didn't do a proper getting to know her. The court had been adjourned a day later, and we reconvened back on that day for the second charge on my wife, fraud. She had claimed I signed the prenup papers, whereas I claimed she and her lawyer had arranged and lifted my signature from a work document. I leave many work documents at home, so lifting my signature wouldn't be too hard with the right skilled person. My lawyer presented the facts before the judge in turn, questioning my wife on how I had signed a prenup then, but now I couldn't remember it. Then the strings of lies began. She claimed I was drunk when I had signed them. Drunk? Me? Now I confirmed she didn't know me at all because there was no way under the clouds of the sky that I had signed some papers while I was under the influence of alcohol. I had never drank alcohol up to the point of getting tipsy or drunk from it ever since the accident that had almost taken my life. The accident had happened on the second week of my second semester in college. There had been a party being thrown by the senior colleagues who were to be graduating that semester, and I was done with all I had planned out on my list. So I talked myself into going to make friends or just have a good time. That was the first time of me ever attending a party. I got there and the party was already raving. At the door, I was handed a drink, and I don't the amount of alcohol that was put inside that cup, but from there I lost all control of my senses. I threw back more drinks than I could count, and from the party got really lit for me. Safe to say, I embarrassed myself in front of various people, most seniors especially. However, that's not what made me stop getting drugged. I was robbed and beaten senseless that night because I didn't have a sense of direction, and I bumped into a group of bad people. From that day, I promised myself I was never getting drunk again, so my wife's claim didn't hold. My lawyer disputed her claim that I was drunk when I signed the prenup with evidence of how the signature looked straight and not muddy, like how a drunk person would have signed it. That didn't deter my wife one bit, as she was overly eager of splitting my property along with this divorce. Property she hadn't worked for, mind you. Well, you could say she worked for it by putting up with me for 5 years to be able to achieve her goal. My disbelief, shock, anger, and hatred had mixed together at this point. This was premium stuff that only happens in the movies, and I lived it. Like I said, she really refused to give up, hence increasing what was supposed to be a small case. Redditors on this platform wouldn't guess the new case she presented to the court. Abuse. My wife accused me of emotionally and verbally abusing her. What evidence did she have, you may be wondering? She and her lawyer had tweaked a video of me shouting at one of my contractors on my estate and presented to the court as evidence of me abusing. At that point, it was obvious they were grasping for straws, and the judge had already concluded her judgment, but for the sake of laughs, needed to listen to them. It was hilarious, and I know you all would find it so. My lawyer quickly disproved the claim that showed it was my contractor I had raised my voice at on the phone. The court went on a break, and we reconvened back in an hour to hear what the judge had decided on our case. Revenge was really a dish served cold because what my wife planned for me was handed back to her tenfold. She was found guilty of 2 charges, bigamy and fraud. The court set her bail at $200,000 with 3 weeks of community service. Her jail time was set to 5 years imprisonment if she couldn't meet bail, and I went home a happy man with my money, property, and peace of mind intact. 2 days later, my wife and her lawyer delivered the divorce paperwork to me, and I happily signed, knowing I had managed to escape a terrible scenario. There was no point in signing the divorce papers, but I wanted it to be on record that my wife and I had nothing else to do with each other, even if we weren't truly married in the first place. I wondered what would be going through her mind now that her plan had failed. There were still some questions I would have loved to ask her, but that hatred still burned strong in my heart, and I was just happy I never had to deal with her again. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you all will be going home with a lesson or two from my experience. I really hoped you learned something from the terrible experience I had with the woman I had thought I had married. Try not to be like me that thought all these stuffs only happen in movies, and always keep an eye out on the people you call your closest. There are a lot of things to be wary about all the time. Stay alert, and until next time, my friends, thank you for reading my experience.